look at the state today of manufacturing, how would you characterize the overall health of the North American sector?
It's always a tough question, right? Because there's always some that are performing better than others, and it's tough to speak on an aggregate. From our perspective, I would say that the North American manufacturing industry is still concerning me a bit in terms of overall health, especially from a financial perspective, but it's improving. What we're seeing today in the market for the most part is that we still have some manufacturers that are over leveraged in what I would call kind of concerning financial position.
Welcome to the Springs Are Everywhere podcast, a production of SMI, the Spring Manufacturers Institute. I'm your host, Gary McCoy, Executive Director of SMI. Our podcast explores the ideas, innovations, and people shaping the future of manufacturing and small business. You'll also get a brief glimpse of products that contain springs in our Did You Know segment. We appreciate your feedback. Take a moment to subscribe, rate the show, and give us a like on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. Please leave us a comment, and it really helps us if you do that because it helps other people discover the show. In this episode, we're going to look at economic signals, tariff pressures, and market forces that are shaping today's manufacturing landscape. To help us unpack all this is Cara Walton, Director of Wipfli, and among other things, Cara is a thought leader in economics, manufacturing, and tariff dynamics. The Springs Are Everywhere podcast is brought to you in part by our platinum sponsor, Gibbs Interwire. Today, we're joined by Cara Walton, Director of Wipfli and one of the leading voices in manufacturing intelligence, economic trends, and tariff dynamics. Cara and her team analyze millions of data points from thousands of manufacturers, giving them a unique, clear view of what's happening across North America. Cara, thanks for joining the program today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So, Cara, to listeners and viewers who may not know your work, how would you describe Wipfli's manufacturing intelligence platform and the type of insights it provides?
Certainly. So Wipfli is a large public accounting and advisory firm, and we work in all industries, but MRD, that's what we call it, so manufacturing, retail, and distribution, is our largest industry, and I may be a bit biased, but I think also our best industry and the one that's the most fun to be in. So to your point and to the introduction, I've spent my time working in manufacturing market intelligence, and that means a few things to us. The biggest thing that we do, and we'll talk about some of the data during the discussion today, is we collect data from manufacturers. So all different types of metal forming, plastics processing, die casting, forging, machining, tooling, you name it, right? We probably have a few data points on it. And we look at really the overall health of those businesses. And our intention is not necessarily to understand specifically what's happening in one entity, but to take that data about what's happening in the broader manufacturing industry and provide that back to companies, right? So if I can say, okay, your business looks like this, and if we look at 10 other companies that are similar and we aggregate and average out their data, it looks like this. So we try to help with benchmarking and use real data and information to help make informed decisions. I'm sure we'll talk about it throughout the podcast, but as you know, there's a million things that every single manufacturer could be doing today, right? The list is never ending, but we try to at least use data and market intelligence to help them determine, okay, what should the top 3 things be right now? Because the list is never going to end, right? You're not going to be done at any point in time if you're in manufacturing.
So that foundation is so important because it sets the stage for everything else we're going to talk about today, especially the health of the industry itself. And Cara, when you look at the state today of manufacturing, how would you characterize the overall health of the North American sector?
Yeah, it's always a tough question, right? Because there's always some that are performing better than others, and it's tough to speak on an aggregate. But in fairness, that's why you asked me here, so I'll do my best. From our perspective, I would say that the North American manufacturing industry is still concerning me a bit in terms of overall health, especially from a financial perspective, but it's improving. If you had asked me that question 12 months ago, I probably would have had a more concerning outlook on it. But what we're seeing today in the market for the most part is that we still have some manufacturers that are over leveraged in what I would call kind of concerning financial positions, a lot of competition with low cost countries or better cost countries, a lot of competition even internally, a lot of price increases, things of that nature that they're facing. But we are seeing improvements in demand, and we are seeing kind of positivity as we go into the back half of 2026. So I think, to answer your question, right, there's still some concerning spots, but overall, I think we're doing better as we go into the rest of 2026 than compared to the same time frame last year. And we have a few businesses who are maybe slightly less leverage or seeing slightly better margins as we're about 6 months, almost 7 months into the year at this point.
Cara, let's dig deeper into the forces shaping that health. And let's start with the economy. What economic indicators should manufacturers be watching, most closely right now, especially those tied to durable goods, demand, and for a lesser extent with manufacturers, consumer behavior?
Certainly. Yeah, I think economic indicators are always an interesting one to talk about with the manufacturing industry, right? Because the economy is so wide and there's so many indicators out there. You could spend your entire day every day just reading economic indicators, but not all of them, to your point about something like consumer health, are directly correlated to what's actually happening in the manufacturing industry. I do like at a high level to always understand what's happening with gross domestic product, but I always caveat that by saying that of total GDP in the US, only about 9% of that GDP is made up by manufacturing. So if we look at what's happening in GDP, only a small subset of that is actually a reflection of what's happening in the manufacturing industry. So better metrics from my perspective, better things to look at. You brought up durable goods demand. I think that's the single best metric to focus on. And specifically, I would recommend digging into the details behind it. Every time that a durable goods demand number is published, which is every single month, there's detail in terms of which markets within that, aerospace, medical, automotive, appliance, might be going up or going down. If you look at a top line chart, I have one in a presentation that I'm doing today as well, where you say, hey, durable goods demand is up. The reason why I like the data behind it, and I'm bringing that up specifically, is because durable goods demand is up, but predominantly in aerospace, for example. So commercial aerospace is really boosting the durable goods demand today, whereas some other sectors, if you dig into the details behind the data, aren't necessarily booming as much. Automotive inventories are recovering, but not necessarily at the level that I think the average auto supplier would want them to be. Similar dynamics in appliance and power sports. So that's kind of my favorite metric. I do consistently watch interest rates. I think that the cost of money is a really important one for our manufacturers to understand because for two reasons. One, obviously, the average manufacturer is going to be financing something, right? Some are fully cash businesses, but for the most part, we're going to be financing something, whether it be our building, our machine, so we have a line of equity or something of that nature, right? The other reason why I really like looking at interest rates is because interest rates do have direct impacts on your employee health. So not to kind of get the cart before the horse here, but I think one of the primary challenges for manufacturers today is they are paying their people more money, but their people aren't necessarily feeling like they're making more money because of inflation rates and because of higher interest rates. And I think that understanding where interest rates are consistently, and then I brought up inflation, that sticky CPI, so that sticky consumer price index, are two primary areas that really help better articulate the health of not only some of the business aspects, right? What you're looking at in terms of your balance sheet and how leveraged you are. But in my opinion, maybe more importantly, maybe equally important, depends on the discussion if I'm talking to the head of HR or the CFO. But from the head of HR's perspective, it also has a direct correlation to your financial health of your employees, which at the end of the day, they're working for you. They're making a paycheck from you. You need to be aware of their financial health and help them as much as you can to keep them employed with you.
Cara, you often emphasize understanding customer health. And what signals help manufacturers anticipate demand shifts before they feel them operationally?
Certainly. I think customer health is a really intricate one to understand in today's market, right? So, the way that I like to bring it up is that customer health is one of the areas to help better forecast and, to your point, kind of preempt when we're going to see potential declines in inventory. One way to do that is to look at overall earnings of the end company. Now, I've had many manufacturers who have told me before, they've said, yeah, Cara, that's all well and good. That's a great idea. But I don't actually know who I supply to, right? I supply this part and then it goes to 10 different OEMs, for example. Sometimes that happens, right? So the first thing that I encourage is, to the best of your ability, understand at least what OEM, right, what end product your good is going on. And if possible, even understand the product line or the brand name. The reason why I bring that up is because if you dig into financials, let's say for someone like GE Appliances, for example, just to pick an industry, right? You can see that their earnings and their profitability and even their volumes for their really highly contented, more expensive product, their fancier ranges that would compete with like the Wolves of the world, for example, those are doing much better than some of their baseline product today. Because those top earners, those high spenders from an economic perspective, are spending the most money and they're buying that really fancy product. So if I am a manufacturer, again, to your point, relating it back to the manufacturer, if I have the ability to understand, am I supplying into their baseline fridge that goes in apartments and then stays in that apartment for 20 years? Or am I supplying into their really high end line that whenever someone redoes their cabin on Lake Michigan or something, they're replacing it with that higher end product? That's really helpful in understanding potential changes in inventory or changes in demand. The one other factor I would bring up here that I think is sometimes not used as often as I hope it would be used is your own historical data with that customer. So a lot of times we rely on, what does the customer say their forecast is going to be, right? It's a great piece of information. We always want to get those customer forecasts where appropriate. But to the same avail, if internally to your organization, you know that every single year come sometime between September and October, for example, we see a decline in demand from this specific OEM, and you've been seeing it for 3 of the last 5 years within your own historical financials, then plan for that, right? Then maybe your historical data is helping you better understand the dynamics with that customer, even if they're saying, nope, full speed ahead, my forecast is perfect, and we're going to have the same demand throughout the end of the year, right? I always encourage companies to think about what data they have at their disposal, and their internal data, I think, is one of the most valuable ways to better understand and forecast changes in demand and really plan ahead, to your point, and preempt any of those changes before the OEM or the tier is going to come back and change your expectations.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more insights from Cara Walton in just a moment.
Gibbs Interwire, North America's largest spring wire distributor, now offers precision draw, high-performance alloy wire through our partnership with Alloy Specialty Metals. With over 125 alloys, our goal is to deliver exactly what you need, precisely when and where you need it. We're committed to bringing you simpler sourcing with the highest quality results tailored to your requirements. As a longtime supporter of SMI's mission to inform the spring industry, Gibbs Interwire is proud to be the platinum sponsor of the Springs Are Everywhere podcast. For your quote today, call Gibbs Interwire at 800-800-4422 or visit us at gibbswire.com.
Cara, there is no doubt that tariffs and trade policy are influencing decisions every day. Which current tariffs or trade policies are having the greatest impact on manufacturers today?
Is it a bad answer to say all of them? I know that's probably not the best answer, but in some ways, all of them are impacting manufacturing in different ways, right? I feel bad saying that because people are like, oh man, I have to navigate all of these tariffs. But I'll try to answer the question a little bit and kind of shed some light into some of the specific dynamics that we're seeing. In my opinion, in our opinion at Wipfli, all of the tariffs are relevant for one reason that I want to bring up first, and then we can kind of dissect some of the specific sections, right? I'm hearing a lot of sentiment in the market right now that, well, everything that I source is domestic, right? Everything is coming from the US, so these tariffs don't impact me. Overall, all of the tariffs, IEEPAs, 232s, 301s, 122s, trade agreements, whatever you want to bring up, right? All of them are doing two things to all manufacturers, whether you're sourcing internationally or not. First, they're creating transactional waste, which I think is the single largest thing for manufacturers to be aware of today. People are spending more time navigating these tariffs, hiring an additional person into their purchasing team, running overtime to chase trucks, doing something because they're trying to better understand what's happening with these tariffs and how it's impacting their businesses, and they're trying to navigate it. This is, at the end of the day, the reason why I bring this up first. This is increasing our SG&A cost as a percent of revenue for the average manufacturer. I care about this, and I think most of the listeners would care about this, because the moment you start increasing SG&A cost, what do? You decrease margin. So I think that's kind of the first factor where that transactional waste is happening across the board. The other area that tariffs is really impacting is this is still market-based pricing. This is still capitalism. Even if all of your materials are coming from a domestic source, they're still seeing the increases in demand domestically because of some of these tariffs overseas. Steel is a perfect example with your Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs, right? I know you know that one really well with many of the members in your organization.
Right,
but that's
for sure.
the ones where you're seeing that increase in demand, and it's raising prices even if everything you're getting is domestic. So my first comment on the tariff side is always to make sure that you're thinking about how is pricing impacting me, even if everything you source is domestic, or if you have some international sources. How are you getting price increases passed through? How quickly are you getting those price increases passed through? And how are you managing the additional transactional waste and focusing on what you can control within your business, rather than just having people running around with their hair on fire, for lack of a better term, right? Trying to navigate all of these tariffs. And I know that's not the most pleasant answer, but that's the reality that many manufacturers are facing today. But we can talk more specifically about certain tariffs, but that's kind of the high level answer to your point of what's impacting them. What should they focus on the most?
Yeah, and I want to shift over to trade deals.
Yeah.
Those are things that a lot of manufacturers don't understand. And how would you tell them how this could potentially affect some of the different sectors they participate in?
Certainly. So I think that the key with trade deals that I don't think is being talked about enough right now is that a lot of the trade deals, so I'll use like Japan and the US, for example. Japan is a big supplier, obviously, of a lot of machinery that many of our US manufacturers would use. There's others as well, but Japan is one of them. So just to use that trade deal as an example. The Japan-US trade deal came out earlier this year, But that quote unquote deal, and I'm kind of using air quotes as I say it, right? That was still a part of the IEEPA specific tariffs. So yes, it did agree to a lower effective tariff rate, but all of those decisions were agreed upon based off the US administration's ability to utilize IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, to impose those tariffs. So when the Supreme Court struck down IEEPA, those tariffs, even though it was part of a quote unquote trade deal, those tariffs were also no longer in effect. So I think that's something that's really important to bring up on the trade deal discussion, because in a lot of cases, people are saying, oh, well, we have a trade deal with so-and-so. I know my tariffs are lower. That's not necessarily the case, because in some cases, those trade deals are no longer valid if they were built under IEEPA. Or even if there is still a valid trade deal in certain cases, like some of the automotive trade deals we've been making with the EU and things of that nature, we still have other tariffs that are potentially being imposed under Section 232 and Section 301 that are, frankly, likely going to increase in this July timeframe. So we have this kind of pending announcement from the Trump administration. We know they're already doing investigations into additional areas of Section 232, which is the product-specific tariffs. They're also doing additional investigations under Section 301, which is the country-specific tariffs. So we expect them to announce additional tariffs in July. So to answer your question, again, kind of more broadly, but on the trade deal front, every single good, the HTS code that you're using in the country of origin, is the only way to make the most informed decision about what the effective tariff rate is that you're going to be paying. Even if there is a trade deal with a certain country, that doesn't necessarily apply to all goods. And some of the tariffs that could be announced in July could supersede any of those prior trade deals. So again, I feel like I'm not necessarily the bearer of the best news with that type of comment,
Right.
but that's the reality of what many manufacturers are facing today.
So can you handle the truth is what you're saying.
Yeah, I realize I should probably like come bearing like a beer or a cup of coffee, depending on the time of day, to like
True.
help aid in these discussions.
So let me dive into another, obviously a big effect is geopolitical events. It affects supply chains, cost structures, and just competitive dynamics. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously where we're sitting right now, one of the biggest geopolitical factors is the war with Iran, and then the current closure closure, opening, minimal closure, however you want to term it, depending on the specific day, with the Strait of Hormuz, right? So that's the primary. There's other geopolitical challenges out there as well, but that's the primary one that's being talked about. In my opinion, the key to think about, and this is a good example with the current geopolitical factors we're facing, but it applies more broadly than this specific issue. What I would counsel manufacturers to think about is for every single month that we are in this conflict, so for every single month that we're kind of dealing with these circumstances, higher fuel costs, higher resin prices, higher shipping costs, whatever the specific dynamic may be, it's going to take just as long for our markets to normalize again after we're out of it. And that's kind of a rule of thumb, right? I'm sure some people would debate that with me, but in general, we have to wait just as long when we get out of it. And the reason why I bring that up to you as you bring up these geopolitical issues is because I'm concerned that many manufacturers, as soon as this issue is over, right? Once the strait is open again, we start to see relief in fuel prices, which we've seen a bit of in some areas, although it will likely continue to fluctuate, that we're immediately going to say, okay, we're good. Our pricing is back to normal. That's not the case, right? We still have to work this through our entire economic system again, and then ultimately have it decrease the total cost of our rail or whatever it may be that we're shipping in our own manufacturing facilities. So I bring that up thinking specifically about what's happening with the US and Iran right now, but also more broadly, because every time there's a geopolitical issue, I think it's important for us to apply that type of logic to say, okay, we got to first get through this, right? Which is something we might not be able to control, right? Individual manufacturers might say, well, I can't influence what's happening in Iran. Totally fair. Neither can I. I sometimes wish I could, but I can't, right? But what I can do is I can make sure that I'm running my own business to ensure that I'm covering my costs even after the issue has resolved, to make sure that I'm still aware and frankly managing my business appropriately to keep making money as we normalize after whatever that geopolitical issue is resolved. So that's kind of the biggest area that I think we can control, right? There's always going to be another geopolitical issue. I don't know what it's going to be. If I did, maybe I would start playing around in the stock market or gambling a bit more. But I don't know what it will be, but I know that there will be another one, right? This is the world that we live in. And I know that in some ways it will likely impact the manufacturing industry, either directly or indirectly. And we have to be aware of that as we move forward in running businesses.
So let's talk about stuff maybe it's a little more specific and knowable as your benchmarking data, which is always a highlight for manufacturers. You can compare performance, spot trends. So as you look at your company's benchmarking results, what trends or surprises stand out to you this year?
Yeah, and I appreciate the specificity and also maybe a little bit more of a positive note, right? To go back to where we started the discussion, it's recovering. It's looking better in 2026. So kind of a few key indices that I love to bring up when we talk about the benchmarking data. We just closed our most recent survey. So results are actually getting published likely right around when this podcast comes out. So one of the biggest pieces of data that we look at is capacity utilization. So we normalize this based off a 24/5 shift schedule to understand across all different types of manufacturers, across all different types of shifts, how much of your capacity are you currently utilizing? The good news, the positivity that I like to bring up is that across manufacturers, we saw an improvement in capacity utilization in the second quarter of 2026 compared to 2025. And we're forecasting it get even better towards the end of the year. So that's across all different types of processors, all different types of metal formers, whether it be springs, gauges, gears, fixtures, you name it, all of them are forecasting those increases in capacity utilization. So overall, I think that's really positive, and that does tie back to some increases in consumer health as well. On average, the downside is that we're still sitting at capacity utilization between kind of 60 and 65%. So there's still room, right? The average manufacturer probably isn't going to sit back and say, I'm so busy, I don't know what to do, right? Whereas back maybe during that post-COVID timeframe, some were so busy with so much work that they really had no open capacity. We're not in that circumstance, but on average, it is improving, and we're seeing positivity from a capacity utilization perspective. And my concern is that although we're kind of seeing those improvements in capacity utilization, our profit on average, our EBIT specifically, so we look at earnings before interest and tax, we kind of take depreciation and amortization out of it. In our opinion, it's a little bit less of a good reflection from true operations, right? With that DA, that depreciation and amortization in there. So when we look at EBIT, although we're seeing increases in capacity utilization and increases in efficiency, is still flat. So we're not necessarily making more money despite being more utilized and despite improving efficiency in our businesses. And I think that trend's really important for awareness. Kind of average profitability right now for for manufacturers is sitting at about 4%. So 4% of total revenue. The reason why I bring that up, especially as kind of we're talking about this and understanding what manufacturers can do, is because this is why I've been so adamant on the costs, right? Whether it be transactional waste because of tariffs, whether it be price changes because your shipping costs have increased, whatever the circumstance is, we're seeing kind of this, it's an old phrase, right? But death by a thousand cuts mentality, where even though manufacturers are improving capacity utilization, we're getting more work from our customers, we're landing new customers, we're improving our efficiency, it's not necessarily funneling down to our bottom line. And that's because of all these other kind of smaller factors that really add up. Right? If we're not able to get price increases through for 6 months, or if we're not able to get as many people to show up to work without sharing stay bonuses or referral bonuses, these are the things that are starting to take their toll on our bottom line. So that's kind of the overall trend that we're seeing from the benchmarking data. The one area that I do think is positivity is light. We publish for a data set that's called the top performers. We determine those as the best in class manufacturers across process types. And we define that as they have to have 3 of the last 5 years of the highest, so the top 25% profit and efficiency within our data set. And just for awareness, on average, our data set is about 400 companies for every single study. So it's a pretty tough, we're pretty tough graders, if you will. You got to get up into that 25%. And not just for 1 year, you got to do it for 3. That top performer subset, they are still doing well. So their average profitability actually skyrocketed from 2024 to 2025 to just over 11% on that same EBIT, so that earnings before interest and tax as a percent of revenue. And I think that's really important because what it's showing us is that these best practices, right? Improving efficiency, focusing on your costing models, understanding how you're quoting better, those kind of back to basics mentality, right? Doing the same thing that you've always done and doing it better and more efficiently is still helping manufacturers. It's still allowing them to make more money. It's just a tough market. So not everyone is obviously sitting in that top performer subset, but we are seeing those top performers continue to improve their profitability.
We'll be back with some practical takeaways from our discussion today in just a moment.
For more than 60 years, Radcliffe Wire has shaped the world, literally. From over 60 metals, we craft precision custom wire in the exact size, shape, and finish your industry demands. When quality matters and reliability is non-negotiable, choose the experts who shape excellence. Radcliffe Wire. To learn more, visit radcliffewire.com.
To close out our discussion today, Cara, let's bring this home with some actionable guidance. If you were advising a leadership team today, what are the top factors they should monitor to stay ahead of economic, trade, and market changes?
Yeah, for sure. I think at the end of the day, the part that I try to start with there and that our whole team at Wipfli tries to start with consistently is control what you can control, right? There's always going to be outside market forces. There's always going to be podcasts like this one and others that talk about all of the things that are happening in the market right now. At the end of the day, you need to be aware of those as a leader, as C-suites within an organization and within a manufacturer, but you have to control what you can within the 4 walls of your business, or if you have multiple plants, within the 8, 12, 16 walls, however you want to term it, right? Whatever is happening within that facility, that's what matters to you. So kind of when it comes to that, the primary areas that we suggest focusing on, the first one, and I think this is always the most important, is do you have a vision, mission, and values, and do you have a 5-year plan? The thing about a 5-year plan is that they're going to change, right? I've said it multiple times. You've said it as well. There's geopolitical issues. There's challenges out there. Your 5-year plan isn't something that you etch in stone and then you mount on your wall and then it never changes for the next 5 years. But are you still all marching in the same direction? And what direction is that, right? That's kind of the first question that we always make sure, especially in these tumultuous and changing times, manufacturers are thinking about. And then you can get more tactical and more specific within that, right? So the big one is maybe our 5-year plan said that we're going to grow 20% every single year, right? Or whatever the forecast is that we put out there when we were young and sprightly 4 years ago.
Right.
Being realistic about what that forecast actually is today, right? So the question that we ask is, are you right-sized for current demand? Are you sitting in an appropriate position based off where your demand forces are today? We talked about forecasting and understand what your customers are doing. Do you have a robust forecast? So what I mean by that, why I ask that question is, are you looking at your customer data, but are you also looking at your own internal data? And are you also looking at outside market intelligence? The term that we use internally is it's a three-legged stool. So when you're forecasting, no two, right? Just outside market intelligence and customer forecast, that stool can't stand without that third leg, which is your internal data, or vice versa. So is your sales team realistic about their forecasts? And is your finance team or your C-suite really looking at the specifics to understand, okay, are we being honest about what it is that we can achieve? And do we have the right operating structure for that? I'm not suggesting that we immediately go towards layoffs or go towards rifts or anything of that nature, but be honest with yourself. What's your cost structure? And then what's your forecasted demand? And do the two actually work together when you're realistic about that forecast? The one other factor that I think comes into play with that, and this is kind of the last one that I would bring up to you, and I have one parting shot beyond that, but are we understanding scenario plans? And within that, are we understanding the health of our supply chain? So we've talked about some of the geopolitical issues, some of the tariff and trade challenges. The average manufacturer is going to say, well, here are all the challenges that I'm facing. Certainly, and we're all facing challenges today, right? But so are your suppliers. So are your suppliers healthy? Are you talking to them consistently? Are you paying them consistently to the best of your ability? How is that going? And how does potential changes in your supply chain impact those scenario plans that you're running, right? If your key supplier that supplies 50% of one specific part that's on your highest volume program, just to come up with an example, right? If that supplier goes out of business or if they shut down for a few days or something of that nature, how does that impact you? I'm not saying it's going to happen, right? I'm not predicting the future here, but we have to be prepared. What levers do you pull so that you can respond when or if one of those scenarios may occur? And that kind of brings me to the last piece of it. And again, this goes back to like what you can control and then understanding those different scenario plans and where to forecast. The parting question that I would ask, or that I would encourage leaders to think about in their own business, is we're in a time where everybody's busy. Everybody, right? We all have something to do. We all have something we need to get done by 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. or 4 p.m., whenever we end our day, every single day. How are we still taking time to think strategically and think differently and maybe approach things differently than we have before? We get into such a firefighting mode, and I do it myself as well, where I'm like, okay, here are the things I got to get done before I sign off for the day. But I'm not allowing time for myself and my team to say, okay, we got to get these things done, but is there a better way? Can we do them differently? Do we have to communicate this way? Do we have to run this part this way? My concern kind of broadly in the industry, as I've kind of watched it over the last decade, is sometimes we're losing that creativity. And I think that's what manufacturers are best at. It is our job, and we're darn good at solving problems, right? We can figure out how to make a part that someone else can't figure out how to make, or how to fix something or maintain a quality expectation. I don't want us to lose that. So that's always kind of my one question, is how do we challenge the organizations to think differently and make sure that we're continuing to do what we do best, which is creatively solve problems?
Well, I love that. That is such an important thing. And if you go out into the manufacturing spaces like I do, and I'm sure you do as well, you see a lot of creativity. Like, that was a problem we fixed. What an incredible blessing that is to their customers, and it talks to the team they've put together of employees. Cara,
we're doing cool stuff. We're always doing really cool stuff in the manufacturing industry.
Yeah, it really is. So, Cara, this has been great. I love all your insights. And what's the best way to folks reach out to you?
Certainly. Yeah. So obviously I am on LinkedIn. I post a lot of my own content. We also have a newsletter that's sent out through Wipfli where we share updates on the tariff and trade environment. We also share updates on the manufacturing industry. If you're interested in being a part of that, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can get you added to that to make sure that you're getting ongoing content. And beyond that, similar to you, right? I'm out in the industry. I speak at events every single year. Please find me, seek me out at a specific event if it's not reaching out online. I also would love a good old fashioned in-person conversation over a cocktail or over a coffee, again, whatever it may be, because we're all always out in the industry. So I would recommend LinkedIn first or reaching out via Wipfli. But also, let's just maybe find each other at one of the trade events where we're all solving those cool problems.
Cara, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
In addition to Gibbs Interwire, the Springs Are Everywhere podcast has been made possible by the generous support of our silver sponsor, Automated Industrial Motion. AIM is a world-class leader in the design, manufacture, and service of spring coiling machines and wire forming equipment. You can learn more at aimcoil.com.
Thank you for joining us on the Springs Are Everywhere podcast, and a special thanks to Cara Walton from Wipfli. Be sure to return next time to more conversations that help manufacturers navigate change and seize new opportunities. To learn more about the work of SMI, be sure to visit smihq.org. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to subscribe to the show and give us a like on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. We also love to read your comments. We're grateful for the generous support that makes this program possible. Our platinum sponsor, Gibbs Interwire, our gold sponsor, Radcliffe Wire, and our silver sponsor, Automated Industrial Motion.
The next time you're firing up the grill for a backyard barbecue, remember that springs are hard at work behind the scenes. Outdoor grills rely on several different types of springs to function safely and efficiently. Lid hinge springs help lift and support heavy grill tops, while ignition and control knob springs help ensure smooth operation. Even the thermometer often contains a coil spring that helps measure and display temperature accurately. Made from high-temperature stainless steel, these springs are designed to withstand extreme heat, changing weather conditions, and repeated use. It's just one more example of how springs play an important role in the everyday products we count on all summer long. And as always, it's proof that springs are everywhere.